and we'll have some opening comments and some questions afterwards. But before I go into that, okay, we'll proceed. Opening comments by Director Lee and staff.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members and guests of the committee. I'm Barbara Lee, the Director of the Department of Toxic Substances Control. Thank you very much for having me here today to speak with you. As the Secretary mentioned, since my decision to deny the permit for the Exide facility, many things have happened. The Department accelerated payments into Exide's Closure Trust Fund and structured a closure process for the facility. These terms were embodied in an enforcement order that you will hear more about later. And that order was accepted by Exide's Board of Directors on March 11th, when the board also accepted the terms of a non-prosecution agreement with the U.S. Attorney. The enforcement order and the non-prosecution agreement were approved by the bankruptcy court at the end of March, and in April of last year, the company filed a formal notice of closure with the department. Later in April, I met with about 200 residents of communities at Resurrection Church in Boyle Heights. That was the first of 6 community meetings that I have personally participated in for communities around Exide in the last 9 months, including meetings in Maywood, Huntington Park, and Commerce. Later in April, to create a greater regulatory coordination as well as improve the public engagement at the site, and with the support of Assemblymember Santiago, I reached out to the South Coast Air Quality Management District, and we have jointly convened an advisory group for the Exide closure and cleanup that includes the County of Los Angeles, the City of Vernon, elected officials, and officials at the federal, state, and local level. It also includes academics, advocates, community leaders, and members of the community. There are 40 members on this advisory group and a community member co-chair. We also jointly funded a technical advisor for the community members of the advisory group to support their full and effective participation in our closure and cleanup decisions. Since I joined the department, we have overseen the testing of 48 properties, and 191 properties have been cleaned up. So as you can see, the Secretary is relatively current in his knowledge of the site. Even with this, tests and analyses that were completed in July showed lead emissions from the facility could be contaminating properties as much as 1.7 miles from the facility. As mentioned by the Secretary, only a few weeks after this information came to light, we worked with the legislature to augment our budget with $7 million to test up to 1,500 additional properties and to continue the cleanup of the most contaminated properties, as well as conducting the necessary environmental review to design a plan that addresses the risks posed by Exide's contamination. This action means that residential properties are being cleaned up years earlier than would otherwise have been required. As you will hear later, Exide has, under the bankruptcy court terms, until 2019 to complete its study and plan for cleaning up residential properties, and they don't begin setting aside funds for that work until 2018. With the $7 million that was augmented into our budget, DTSC is carrying out the residential cleanup using a different authority than the authority for closure of facilities under the federal statutes that govern those closures. And we will seek to recover those costs from Exide and from any other responsible party that we identify. We have the administration's full support for this approach because it allows us to move more quickly And we are working closely with the Attorney General's office to ensure that we take all of the necessary steps so we have the strongest possible cost recovery case when we get to that point in the process. In 2015, DTSC alone dedicated 22,000 hours of staff time to the Exide project. This is the level of commitment the department has, and this is the level of commitment we are sustaining to ensure that this closure and cleanup happen quickly and effectively and safely for the community. At this time, I would like to turn the talk over to Elise Rothschild. She is my new Deputy Director of our Hazardous Waste Management Program, and she's going to give you some background overview of our authorities for closure and corrective action.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lee. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Elise Rothschild. I'm the Deputy Director of the Hazardous Waste Management Program. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss with you the regulatory oversight of closure plans for hazardous waste facilities, including how DTSC permits a facility, how closure plans provide a safe method for removal of hazardous waste and cleanup of facilities, how closure plans and cost closure estimates are developed, reviewed, and approved by DTSC, DTSC's role in effective implementation of closure plans, and the types of financial mechanisms available and their requirements. Before I discuss how closure plans are developed, I want to lay out the regulatory process for permits and where closure plans, financial assurance, and corrective action fit into the permitting process. I will be defining each of these terms as I go through my presentation. Please turn your attention to the RCRA regulatory process for permits, closures, and corrective action graphic sheets. It looks like this in your handout. Are we good? Okay. This flow chart shows the connections between permitting, closure, and corrective action, including the California Environmental Quality Act, also known as CEQA. As I move through my talk, I will discuss the elements of this flow chart. In order for a facility to receive a permit to treat, store, transfer, or dispose of hazardous waste, the facility must submit a permit application that is prepared by a licensed engineer. The application must include a detailed description of the facility's activities and areas of hazardous waste management, types of equipment used, engineering and structural specifications, record-keeping system for tracking hazardous waste, procedures for response to accidental release, nearby communities, schools, child care centers, nursing homes, and hospitals, employee training. The application must also contain the facility's closure plan and closure cost estimates, as well as the mechanism for financial assurance in the event of closure to pay to safely close the facility. And ultimately, the applicant must demonstrate the ability to manage the waste in a protective manner. Once DTSC reviews the application for technical completeness, which includes a review of compliance for all requirements, we prepare a draft permit or draft notice of intent to deny, which is then circulated for public review and comment. We also prepare the appropriate CEQA documentation, which will be circulated for public review and comment at the same time as the draft permit. After carefully considering public comments, we reconsider the draft permit or the proposed denial of the permit and make a final permit decision. If a permit is issued, we continue to monitor the operation of the facility to ensure compliance with the facility permit. How does corrective action, also known as site cleanup, fit into the permitting process? Corrective action requires the facility to clean up past releases of hazardous waste. California law requires any permit issued by DTSC to require corrective action for all releases of hazardous waste at a facility, regardless of when it occurred, including historical releases prior to RCRA becoming a law in the 1980s. The permit will contain schedules of compliance for corrective action. DTSC can also issue an enforcement order to the facility for corrective action. The permit or an order will contain a compliance schedule, including an investigation of the release and a plan to clean up the contamination. There are currently 175 facilities with ongoing corrective action. DTSC's cleanup program oversees corrective action activities. So how are closure plans developed? As I mentioned before, closure plans are an integral part of the permit application and are reviewed and approved by the department when the permit is issued. The closure plan describes the steps necessary to safely close the facility based on the actual conditions of the facility and must include closure cost estimates consistent with activities described in the plan. DTSC's regulations require permit applications to include a closure plan and closure cost estimate. The approved closure plan is a condition of the permit. The owner is required to submit a request to revise the closure plan when there are changes in operations or facility design that affect the closure plan, there is a change in the expected year of closure, or unexpected events during the closure that would require a modification of the approved plan. A modification of the permit must be approved by the department in order to change the closure plan. DTSC also may request modifications to the plan when the department believes any of these events have occurred. Permit modification are classified based on the complexity and seriousness of the proposed changes with increasing levels of public review and participation. The contents of the closure plan must include a description of how and when hazardous waste management units at the facility will safely be closed, an estimate of the maximum inventory of hazardous waste ever stored on site over the active life of the facility, and a detailed description of the methods to be used during closure to remove, decontaminate, transport, treat, store, and dispose of all hazardous waste. A detailed description of other activities necessary during the closure period to ensure that closure is implemented safely, including groundwater monitoring, leachate collection, run-on and run-off controls, and an estimate of the expected year of final closure. The closure plan must also demonstrate how the facility will close in a manner that minimizes the need for further maintenance, controls or eliminates release of hazardous waste, and complies with the other regulatory requirements. DTSC uses a detailed list of criteria and requirements during the review of closure plan to ensure all applicable requirements are met. DTSC's oversight process of facility closure includes, once notified of the facility closure, we provide direct oversight of the implementation of a closure plan with site inspections to verify that the facility is being closed in accordance with the closure plan. DTSC also requires a certification of closure by an independent registered professional engineer. DTSC will hold release of financial assurance funding until all supporting documentation for closure is submitted and all requirements are satisfied. The history of closed hazardous waste facilities in California. The department has successfully closed 329 facilities. Of the 329 facilities, federal or state funds were used to close 12 facilities that did not have adequate financial assurance. So government funds were used to complete the cleanup. DTSC uses all legal mechanisms available to recover any state funds spent. Closure costs and financial assurance are requirements of a permit. The facility must demonstrate to DTSC that there are sufficient funds available to safely close as well as protect taxpayer resources. When the determination that the closure plan is complete and contains all the necessary information to safely close the facility, DTSC's licensed professional engineers review the closure cost estimate to ensure safe removal of waste and cleanup, including any required contingencies. DTSC will not issue a permit unless adequate funding for safe closure is available. The law allows these financial insurance mechanisms for closure: a trust fund, a surety bond, a letter of credit, insurance policy, financial test/corporate guarantee, and/or any alternative financial mechanism such as a certificate of deposit, secured savings account, and time deposit agreements. DTSC reviews each facility's financial insurance mechanism to ensure it is valid and sound for the safe and proper closure. The department reviews financial assurance mechanisms regularly whenever a facility is inspected prior to a permit renewal or a permit modification. This concludes my presentations, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Do you have any questions or comments from members? Seeing none, want to thank you for that overview and also the work that had been done. Dr. Lee, I want to thank you for participating in those 6 hearings done at the local level. I know the department, and we've had these conversations, that we know that it has its fair share of missteps in the past and certainly subsequent media and legislative scrutiny. But I know that you are at the department trying to steer things in the better direction and keep the department on track and certainly to adhere to its mission in protecting our communities, especially our most vulnerable communities. But before you go, I did want to just mention what was in the media last month. You know, I was certainly disheartened to learn about the email scandal that came out where DTSC employees were found making some racist comments in emails about other employees and as well as constituents. And I know you and Secretary Rodriguez have come out publicly condemning those emails and have slapped those employees on the wrist. But those emails only take DTSC a step backward in terms of protecting the public. The most disadvantaged communities are skeptical of DTSC and have even less faith in the department. And while I didn't want to deviate much from this agenda, I feel that before you leave, we'd like to give you the opportunity to address those, what transpired, and can you please tell us how you plan to restore the trust in the department and repair the damage that this has created to DTSC's image?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you bringing this out in the open for the rest of the committee and guests. At a meeting of the department's new independent review panel on December 9th, the panel was told about racist emails between 2 DTSC employees. The emails were bigoted, discriminatory, and derogatory, and I found them to be very offensive. I made a brief statement to the panel at that meeting and subsequently provided them with some additional information about what happened and what the department did in response. With your agreement, Mr. Chairman, I will summarize that for you today.
Please.
The remarks in these emails were uncovered last spring as we prepared to respond to a Public Records Act request. The request had evolved over some period of time from beginning as a more technical request to focus later on the actions of specific employees regarding a certain site. And while the department twice produced materials in response to that request, the request for the emails was withdrawn before we produced those. But when those offensive emails were uncovered, I was informed and I ordered an investigation. The department has its own legal office, its own human resources staff, as well as an Office of Civil Rights. A team with individuals from each of these offices participated in the investigation of the individuals who were responsible. We also sought outside review from the Attorney General's office, which undertook their own investigation of the employees involved and on the appropriate disciplinary action, as well as a broader look at the culture in the regional office where those 2 employees work. Based on that investigation, we took disciplinary action against the 2 employees. The actions were calculated to prevent any recurrence of the behavior, and the individuals have been transferred out of the assignments that they previously held. Like all state employees, these employees are protected by the constitutional right to privacy, and I therefore won't be discussing the details of their personnel actions, and I also cannot reopen those decisions for further evaluation. Instead, what I'd like to do is talk to you for a moment about what the department has done and is doing to maximize transparency on the offensive emails, and then I'll review the actions that DTSC is taking to strengthen our commitment to supporting diversity and fostering cross-cultural understanding in the department. In October, we received a new Public Records Act request from a different individual, and this time the request specifically requested racist emails between the 2 employees we had already disciplined. We produced those emails, and those emails were the subject of the letter that was read to the independent review panel. In December, we received another Public Records Act request for the documents that were reviewed as part of our investigation, including emails. We provided the first set of emails at the end of December. During the investigation, the department reviewed over 50,000 emails between employees, of which about 90 were offensive or otherwise inappropriate. Prior to releasing those emails, we review each one to make sure that they don't contain information that's subject to attorney-client privilege or other protected information such as Social Security numbers and that sort of thing. The review takes time. In the first release, we included all of the derogatory emails we had uncovered, as well as more than 3,300 pages of additional emails. At my direction, we redacted personally identifying information of each of the individuals that had been subject to the derogatory emails in order to spare those individuals any additional pain or humiliation. However, I reached out to each one of them and offered to share with them the unredacted version of the email in which they were mentioned for them to review and do with as they see fit. I also offered to talk with them about what happened. Many people that I reached out to asked to see the emails about themselves, and I have also spoken with a number of those people as well. We recently produced, just last week, the next batch of 10,000 emails. We are continuing to prepare additional emails for release in the future. There are a number of other steps that I've taken in response to these emails, and that's what I'd like to take a moment to discuss with you now. As I said before, the comments that were made by these two individuals were unacceptable. They violate state and department policies, and they don't reflect the behavior I expect from my staff and management. At our quarterly all-staff meeting last August, I talked to staff about the concerns and complaints that community members conveyed to me over the course of the prior 8 months, and that were voiced by a number of them at my confirmation hearing. I encouraged staff to view the recording of that hearing and be prepared to engage with me on addressing all of those issues. I spoke with them about my vision of environmental justice and why it's a fundamental part of my vision for the department as a whole. I also talked with them about the importance of open communication and bringing our best selves to the important work that we do. I led this all-staff meeting from the regional office where these two employees work. I said clearly and directly to staff in that office and to the entire department that my expectation is that we treat all people with respect and professionalism at all times. This is a message I have reinforced verbally and in writing with staff repeatedly over the last few months. In December, I also sent a video message to the entire department underscoring the conduct I expect. In it, I urged staff to be active in promoting a culture of professionalism and respect amongst themselves and with the public that we serve. And I asked them not to ignore disrespect when they see it. I and my leadership team are committed to fostering a professional, respectful, and collaborative workplace, and to actively support diversity and cultural understanding amongst all of our employees. We have begun implementing a proactive human resources strategy to embrace a culturally diverse workforce in service to California, which is one of our nation's most diverse states. Among the actions we are taking, DTSC is developing an all-staff survey to determine the current level of awareness among staff regarding the benefits of a diverse and culturally rich workforce and society. The survey will also identify perceived strengths and weaknesses in the department's culture and solicit suggestions for opportunities to strengthen the cultural fabric within the department. We are creating a cross-functional, multicultural, multi-level task group to assess strengths and weaknesses in attitudes and interpersonal engagement throughout the department. The group will identify opportunities to support diversity as well as foster intercultural and cross-cultural understanding within the organization and in our engagement with the public. The task group will include representation from all levels of the department, from the executive office to line staff, including the Assistant Director for Environmental Justice, Ana Mascareñas, who will lead the task force, our Deputy Director of our Safer Products and Workplaces program, Dr. Meredith Williams, our new Chief Deputy Director, Francesca Negri, 2 division chiefs, 2 branch chiefs, 2 supervisors, and at least 1 staff member from each regional office, and several members from a few of them. DTSC has reached out to the California Department of Human Resources, the University of California at Davis, and Sacramento State University to get additional assistance in this area. We will contract with outside experts, have them review how the department handles important diversity issues, and recommend approaches to strengthen DTSC's commitment to supporting diversity and fostering cross-cultural understanding. The department will also update its diversity training to assure it is responsive to stakeholder expectations. The department's currently reviewing the training materials used elsewhere in the state, and we will be looking at best practices across the country. DTSC's Equal Opportunity Office and Office of Civil Rights will be incorporating information and feedback obtained through all of the actions I've mentioned to update the department's training modules. As we move through this internally facing process, we also plan to incorporate input from outside the department to better address diversity in our engagement with the people that we serve. This will include leveraging stakeholder surveys and analysis performed under our contract with UC Davis for our public participation modernization project, expanding opportunities to update those for those outside the department to offer feedback to us about their experiences interacting with us, for example, with enhanced feedback forms at our public meetings or workshops, soliciting input from external stakeholders as we develop our solutions and strategies, and incorporating mechanisms to ensure ongoing feedback as we implement the solutions and strategies to help us gauge their effectiveness. After the solutions and strategies have been identified, we will develop or amend conduct-related policies as needed. These policies were all updated in the last 2 years, but the department is committed to revising our policies as needed to ensure they reflect and support our mission and values. When these policies are updated, each staff member is required to review the new policies and provide us with a signed acknowledgement that they have done so. I am happy to update you going forward if you are interested on our progress in this effort. We will be working with our independent review panel and welcome input as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we will be following through on that in future weeks. Assemblymember Santiago has a question.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman, for not catching your attention earlier, but thank you very much. And I do appreciate your insistence on helping us, Director Lee, but I do want to ask a couple of questions. And you and I have worked together in this community now for about a year, and it's fair to say that there's a lack of confidence in the process, and you and I have addressed that on a number of times. So I think it's important for committee members here to hear, and also the public here, what assurances you can give us that this is moving in an expedited fashion and that you are doing all you possibly can to ensure that the closure is a safe closure, and that community and our community's health is being taken into consideration. We're doing all we can to mitigate that as well. Likewise, if there are obstacles that prevent you from doing that, we'd like to know as a committee what those obstacles are so we can help remove the barriers to allow you to move quicker, faster, and more aggressively towards holding Exide accountable and ensuring that the closure is done in the quickest manner possible, and also that the homes are being cleaned up and our community's health is being addressed in the most urgent manner. And I wonder if you can maybe answer both of those questions.